And I am live, I think. The reason I might not be live is because apparently most of the world's social media sites are down at the moment. Very unusual scenario that we find ourselves in. The Facebook is offline. Apparently, Instagram and Twitter also. Actually, I didn't check Instagram. Facebook's not loading for me at all on the computer. It is not refreshing on the phone. It's just showing me status updates from much earlier on. Yeah, 5xx server error I'm getting on Instagram. And WhatsApp not working either. So if you're watching, you're possibly watching only, well, you're watching on YouTube, I hope. Let me just see if that's working, first of all. Yeah, it looks like it is. Yeah. Okay. Let me just see if that's working, first of all. Yeah, good. So, slight change of plan for the moment. So, it's not 8 o'clock. I know it's 20 minutes to 8. So, I said I'd come on early and just explain that I think the fairest thing I can do is that having advertised the story of Tuam McCarroll, given that a lot of people who are on Facebook don't use YouTube and vice versa, probably the safest thing to do is to park the planned episode and just to have a chat, you know. Joan McHugh is telling us. Yeah, I did. I was looking at that, Joan, on actually on Twitter and on Google News. Apparently, the domain name server information has been deleted or wiped or something, hacked. And I don't know a huge amount about the internet, but what I do know is that every website or platform has what's called domain name servers, which is basically a series of numbers. So when you type facebook.com into your browser, or when your phone tries to access it through the app, it's directed, to the site via the domain name servers. I think that, if I understand correctly, that's how it happens. Well, apparently that information is missing at the moment. So it's not like the whole, my understanding of just what I've read is that it's not like the whole site has been deleted or wiped or, hacked or something. It's just access to it is not possible. Deborah Williams is in the house. Hello, Deborah. Very unusual. Yes, all down. Yes, WhatsApp as well. Deborah Williams. Yes, I think we should respond in kind. Hello. So it's going to be a case of maybe we'll talk about, we'll talk about something else for the moment. We'll take questions, maybe have a Q&A. The full Irish GK, that's Gary, says Gia Glitch. August. Gia is more glitch. Gary, Conasatá too. Helen is in the house in South Dakota. Good evening from afternoon in South Dakota. Good afternoon to you, Helen. Welcome along. Who else am I missing? Janelle. Yes, a lot of people suggesting that the Facebook outage is coincidental because of the whistleblower and etc. etc. Who knows? Daisy Peters is in the house. Hello, Daisy. Welcome along to the live stream. Yeah, should I tell some jokes? I tell you, I got some new goldfish. I named them major, minor, diminished, and chromatic. The only way I can tell them apart is by their scales. Please don't hit me. It's a good job you're on the other end. You're not physically here to give me a slap. Well, Gary, you're a regular YouTube user. I'm not a big fan of Farce Book. Yeah. Hello, Elaine. Watching you here since Facebook is down all over the world. Yeah. So Joan reminds me about the quiz that I just completely forgot about. Yeah, Genie Mackers. That's just purely, absolutely my fault because I never sat down and said, right, let's have a list of questions. Beth Kelly is in Oklahoma. Hello there. I could probably make up a quiz on the spot. Hello, Beth. Who else? Cornelia Skipton is in Maryland. Hello, Cornelia. Welcome along. Beth Kelly says, that was a real knee slapper. Are you sure you're not part Norwegian? Look, there was a long incursion of Vikings into this country for a couple of centuries. I could well have Scandinavian DNA, you know. Gary is wondering what everybody's plans are for Samhain, or as some people like to call it, Samhain. My plan for Samhain is to have the Mythical Ireland 2022 calendar printed and being dispatched, and the revised and expanded edition of Mythical Ireland gone to print. That's my plans. And if I manage to do that, then I might actually go somewhere for Samhain and celebrate. Yeah, no, apparently it's a worldwide problem, I think. Certainly, from what I've seen so far, it seems to be affecting everybody, you know. John Horahan is in the house. Great to finally make it to a live stream. Love your work. Well, John, you're very welcome along, and we're sorry that it's going to be slightly different in that I think we're going to shelve the plan for the first of 2 episodes about the story of Tuan McCarroll, because I think it would be unfair to proceed without our Facebook audience. There may be lots of regular Facebook viewers, and they do account for the majority of traffic on the live streams. You know, they may not realize what's going on, and they may not have access to YouTube. So we'll see. There's enough time anyway. That's why I started early. If things rectify themselves on Facebook, we can start streaming on there as well. Dan B has a very specific question. Do any instances come to mind in the ancient world or mythology generally where an individual learns of the death of another during a dream or apparition? A dream or apparition? Well, I know that after the second battle of Moytura, Lugh was very concerned about the whereabouts of his father, Cian. He kind of had a hunch that something was wrong, and Cian had not appeared for the battle. This is from the story of the Sons of Turin. The what's it called? What's the full title of it? Oh, it's not coming to me. Yeah, he had a hunch, and he went in search of his father, and ended up at Muirhevna, which is basically modern day County Louth, which is where I live. He came to the plain of Muirhevna, and he was able to sort of detect that something very, very bad had happened, and basically found his father's grave. And the whole rest of the story is about how he avenges his father's murder on the Sons of Turin. Is it called the tragic tale of the Sons of Turin, or the? I should know this. Without having to pull the book off. No, I'll tell you where I'll get it. In is it in? Yeah, The Fate of the Children of Turin. Yes. Sorry, I apologize for my long-windedness. The Fate of the Children of Turin. Let me just see if I can read that bit from the start. Just trying to think before I get into that. Are there any others where an individual learns of the death of another during a dream or apparition? It's not immediately coming into my head. If anybody else can help Dan with that query, please do. Yeah, so the first part is about the Dadanans and, you know, the Fomorians, etc., etc. I just wanted to get to the part where yeah, that's about the fight. Yeah, towards the close of the day, sorry about the amount of time I spent on that. When the battle was ended, Luga, who's Lou, I have to say this is from P.W. Joyce's Ancient Celtic Romances. I'm a bit surprised at Joyce because Lou was never spelled Luga in the manuscripts. Lou espied two of his near friends, and he asked them if they had seen his father Cian in the fight. And when they answered no, Lou said, "My father is not alive. For if he lived, he would surely have come to help me in the battle. And now I swear that neither food nor drink will I take till I have found out who has slain him and the manner of his death." Then Lou set out with a small chosen band of the she folk. Well, it says the F word host, and he halted not the Danans basically, not till he reached the place where he had parted from his father, and from that he travelled on to the plain of Morhevna, where Cian had been forced to take the shape of a pig to avoid the sons of Turin, and where they had slain him. When he had come near to the very spot, he walked some little way before his companions, and the stones of the earth spake beneath his feet, spoke, should I say, and said, "Here thy father lies, O Lou. Grievous was Cian's strait when he was forced to take the shape of a pig on seeing the three sons of Turin, and here they slew him in his own shape." So you get the idea that he had a hunch or a portent that he kind of knew before he knew, as it were. I'm not sure if that helps. Let me just go back. Joe says that she posted on the Mythical Ireland community page. Well, that's interesting that you even have access to that, Joe, because here in Ireland, Facebook is completely inaccessible right now. So thank you for that. Let me just see if there's any more questions. Yes, Elaine, you did the right thing. Came here because I couldn't get it. Facebook. Hopefully, everybody else does the same. Oh, yeah. Nora Gaffney O'Connor is in the house. Has gone to the dark side because there's no Facebook. Yes, indeed. Let me see. Lillian Cruz is reporting that Facebook, etc., are also down in Brazil as well. Okay, thanks for that. That's yeah, it seems to be sometimes these issues are just in Ireland or in Europe or whatever. It seems to be much more widespread than that. Just looking for more questions. John Main is here from Belmullet in County Mayo. Good evening, John. Sláinte. Yeah, I understand, Dan. I'm just thinking about that one. Yeah, Facebook completely gone here, says Nora. It's not even like on the app on the phone. My Facebook hasn't updated in the past few hours. I'm just seeing the posts from earlier on today. On the web, it just says Facebook, this site cannot be reached. EDT is. I never knew that. EDT is Adele Perth. Hello, Adele. Good morning to you in Australia. How are you? And thank you for joining us on YouTube. We're not having any technical problems. All the technical problems are happening to the companies related to Facebook. That is Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp. I second wanting to know about dragons. That's a very interesting question. I don't know whose question it was in the first place. There is an almost complete absence of them. We saw last week a mention of dragons in Alfred Nutt's discussions. But the problem was that the detail had been completely eliminated, and in any case, you'd have great difficulty. Like a dragon is not something that's normally mentioned in Irish myth. We have monsters such as Mata, which I've mentioned on lots of live streams, which is some sort of giant, slow-moving, sluggish hydra, water snake, water centipede sort of thing. And we have something very similar called the Ullfest, which is like something. Yeah, it's pretty much the same thing. A giant slithery snake worm thing that lives in rivers and sucks them up and cuts the root of a river. Apart from that, let me just quickly do a search here. There is mention of in Ashlinga Ingeso, in the story of the dream vision of Aengus there is mention of when Bov Jarug finds Angus's mysterious love maiden, Care. He tells Aengus and his parents that Care is located at Loch Bail Dracon, which is translated as the Lake of the Dragon's Mouth. However, some scholars have suggested it's from Dryan, which would be Dryan is a type of tree. It's blackthorn, I think. Let me just quickly check. Yeah, so the Irish word beisht or beisht, bi fada ast or be fada ist, and there are 12 or 14 different variants of the spelling, is a wild beast or monster. And possibly a dragon. The difficulty is that you don't get, in Irish myth, you don't get the sort of descriptions of flying, fire-breathing dragons. What you get is a different type of monster. You get a monster that's more associated with water. Now, there is a Drac, D-R-A-I-C, which is a dragon, but generally conceived of as a fire-breathing serpent or monster. And that, for instance, one of the mentions there is Loch Bail Dragon, Dragan. Let me see where that's metrical Dinshenicus, volume 2. If you can hang on for a moment, I will check that. Metrical Dinshenicus, volume 2, 8234. Volume 2, 8234. Yes, the chessboard of Feachu, victorious king, fiery dragon, stout his body. Through his kings he made spear points red. He bound the champions of Ireland. And that's about Ireland, Alend, which is the hill of Allen, which is more famously known as the homestead of Fionn McCool. But that's it. Like, it doesn't, Draken Jaigrech, Dron Achri, fiery dragon, stout his body. Where else might we get a mention that I can read from? Revue Celtique 15441. 441. Let's go to 441 and see if we can find that reference. This is the Ren Dinshenicus, which is the prose Dinshenicus in the Ren. Yes. So that's Loch Bail Dracon again. That is the Lake of the Dragon's Mouth. Okay, so I'll read this. This is from Crotta Cliach, Crottacliach, Crotta Cliach. And as usual with all the Dinshenicus passages, it begins with Crotta Cliach, Conas Ranan Ro Anamniad, which means Crotta Cliach, how was it named, or whence the name. Cliach from She Banya. Banya's Elfmount. Elfmount is a very poor translation of she. was harper to Shmirdov, son of Shmal, king of 3 Rosses. He went to invite Cunchen, daughter of Fuv, from the she of the men of Femin. That's she or famine, or she far famine. Or maybe Bonya was her name. Now, Cleach was a full year making music on that hill, but because the elf's magic might, because of the elf's magic might, he got no nearer to the she, and he could do nothing to the girls. But he played his harp till the earth beneath him burst, and there out the dragon broke forth, and Cleach died of terror. Hence is Loch Baal Dracon, the lake of the dragon's mouth, to wit, a dragon of fire, which Turnoc's foster mother found there in a salmon's shape, and Furza drove it into the lake. And that is the dragon which is prophesied to arise on St. John's Day, at the end of the world, and afflict Ireland in vengeance for John the Baptist, and thence our Crutcha Cleach in Munster. By the way, that story, that prophecy and that belief around St. John's Day was prevalent in Ireland a millennium ago. Coming up to 1000 AD, Irish people believed that the end of the world was nigh. And there was a particularly interesting facet of that, and that was that the Irish believed that the executioner of John the Baptist, the man who executed John the Baptist, was Irish, and that this would be avenged on the Irish coming up to the end of the world. Now let's just scroll back here now for a minute and see if we can find any other questions. Yes, Janet Moran. Good evening, Janet. Good afternoon. Facebook also out in the States, on the East Coast anyway. Janelle wants to know, are there records about who inhabited Ireland before the Great Flood? That is, before the Partholonians and Nemedians. No, Laragawala begins with the flood and begins with the arrival of Kesair. Well, actually, the first volume of that's nice tea. The first volume of Laragawala is the Dispersal of the Nations. That's an attempt by the monks to tie Irish history or prehistory in with biblical timelines and narratives. What we know, and it's precious little, of course, is that the evidence of Paleolithic activity, human activity in Ireland, is extremely sparse. And I think we mentioned on a recent live stream that stone in the National Museum, that piece of flint that was found here in my hometown of Drogheda in a townland called Mel, which is no more than a mile, maybe a mile and a half to the north of me here across the River Boyne, where Professor Frank Mitchell found a flint that he said had been worked by human hands 300,000 years ago. Said flint now being in the National Museum. There is a picture of that here somewhere. Hang on a second till I see if it's in this, and if it's not in this, it might be in that, and if it's not in that, it'll be in the other. This, that, and the other. I suspect. Yeah. It's in the book Treasures of the National Museum, which I'll try to retrieve now. Which is where Treasures of the National Museum of Ireland, which is there. Let me just quickly. Sorry. I hope this isn't. This is tangential, but this could be very interesting. People asking questions, and I'll see if I can answer. And if I can't answer, well, you'll know. Go to someone else. Yes, 45. Prehistory begins at 45. No, I know this stone is in this book. Okay, I'm going to scroll through. So mythology doesn't tell us who might have been here. We do know that not all human life was wiped away during the Ice Age. And the reason we know that is through that bear bone found in a cave in Sligo, which is the subject of a very popular blog post on the Mythical Ireland website at mythicalireland.com. I think it was Marion Dowd of Sligo IT who did a lot of the work on it. But the bear bone, was found to have been cut, like sliced or cut with a stone blade by human hands 10,500 years ago, which pushes back the earliest evidence of human activity on this island, which was previously at Mount Sandel on the very northern tip of the island, where the earliest Mesolithic activity was found. Oh, there we go. Flint Flake, Mel, County Louth, Paleolithic, 400,000 to 300,000 years ago. Look at that. And so if you go to Ireland's National Museum in Dublin, and when you come in from the rotunda, unless things have changed, or maybe they have changed with COVID or anything, maybe there are other changes that I haven't seen this in a few years. But when you go in the door and you turn left, it's immediately there on the right hand side in a box in a glass case on display. It's pretty much the first thing you see when you walk into the museum is this, which I believe is probably lays claim to be the oldest man-made, as it were. I know it's a stone, the oldest object fashioned or handled or made by human hands. Yeah, the bear bone is interesting because what it proves is, or what it would appear to suggest at the very least, is that there were humans here during the latter stage, the Younger Dryas, or the end of the Younger Dryas. There was human activity here. Peter Woods is saying hello from the darkness of Louth. It's not just dark here, Peter. It's actually raining now. Not sure if it's raining with you. Coda, is Coda in or out? Hang on, I need to let Coda in. Is Coda out? Come on. And thank you to Janet Moran for mentioning Coda, because I forgot that he was outside and it's just started to rain here. Good thing there's no power outage at the library, says Helen. I was going to say we could do candlelight, but we'd have no internet or computer. I'm not sure if I fully understand the question from Marcus. How can you determine the age without exercising faith? Is that in relation to the flint, or what's that in relation to? Maybe you'd give me the full question. Yeah, well, Donna, Professor Mitchell reckoned 400 to 300,000 years old. Of course, the great difficulty with it is that it was found in a secondary location. It wasn't found in its primary location. He reckoned it had been washed there by glacial meltwater, so you could never tell where it had been in the first place. But it's recorded as Mel Townland in Drogheda in County Louth, because that's where it was found, you know. I'm not. I've heard of Randall Carlson's name, John, but I haven't read any of his work. So yeah, can't. Not in a position. He's working with dating how long humans have been on the planet. One of the things that I did get recently as a gift, I have to mention this. Was a book that was mentioned in, if you saw the interview, the documentary about the Stout dig at the Stouts, Matthew and Geraldine Stouts dig at Bowbeck during the summer. Matthew was talking about how he had mentioned this book. He mentioned how they himself and Geraldine were being compared to a husband and wife who were sort of archaeologists or anthropologists in the state. And he mentioned this book called Lucy, The Beginnings of Humankind. And I was lucky enough to receive a copy as a gift from one of the Mythical Ireland patrons, no less. And I certainly read the introduction and was absolutely blown away. The earliest hominids are like, I mean, we're talking possibly the best part of 1 million years old, and they had skeletons like us, but they were different. They were similar, but they were different. Incredible stuff. So that was fascinating. Yeah, Generality makes a statement or a comment. Ireland and the British Isles were once connected to the rest of Europe and could be reached on foot. I think that was during the last ice age. Well, there is an argument. Yeah, certainly there was possibly an ice bridge, but I don't know if you remember, we spoke to Professor J.P. Mallory of Queen's University on one of the conversation episodes, and one of the things that he said in his book, The Origins of the Irish, was that there was considerable debate as to whether there was a land bridge or not, and that the land bridge, of course, you're not wrong, because the land bridge may have existed during the last ice age, but remember, the last ice age was a very, very long period of time. But he maintained that, at the end of the Younger Dryas, there was no land bridge left. So it's interesting because, there's a discussion about flora and fauna in particular, certain plants and animals that are found in Britain but aren't found in Ireland, and whether that was evidence for or against the idea of a land bridge. Let me just see if there's MC Spill wants to know my favorite books on Irish myths and legends. Very difficult to narrow that down. However, it's a question that actually has come up before. Favorites are the ones that give me the most information. Favorites, not always necessarily the most romantic. So I'm going to have to put some books back, otherwise there's going to be a big pile here on the desk. Bear with me for a moment. Ancient Irish Romances goes there. It does if it fits, and it doesn't. Okay, Trickle Dinshanicus goes there. Revue Celtique goes there also. And Lucy goes back down there. So some favorites in terms of information. And did I leave it there? No, I didn't. Promised to Maya Square. So just a sort of a very quick selection of favorites for MC Spill, whose name I don't know. You absolutely cannot be without the Dictionary of Celtic Mythology, the Oxford Dictionary of Celtic Mythology, edited and compiled by James MacKillop. I did reach out to James MacKillop earlier in the year. He lives in the States. He's quite elderly, I understand, at this stage. He may be in his early 80s. asking if he would partake in an episode, and unfortunately, he declined for very good reasons, and that was perfectly acceptable. I didn't certainly wouldn't be giving out about it. Would have been lovely to have a chat with him. The Lore of Ireland, an encyclopedia of myth, legend, and romance by Dahi O'Hogan, the late great Dahi O'Hogan, is also a must-have. They are encyclopedias. They're like dictionaries. They're brilliant. A very, very good reference point. A decent introduction, but don't... a decent introduction to Celtic mythology, which would include, Irish and some Welsh and etc. Would be Charles Squire's The Mythology of the Celtic People, which was originally published as was a Celtic Myth and Legend. Celtic Myth and Legend, Poetry and Romance, first published in 1912. It's pretty good. Some people, scholars, probably wouldn't recommend it, but very good sort of popular introduction. You can't also be without Early Irish History and Mythology by T.F. O'Reilly, which I think was published in 1946 originally. Yeah, first published 1946. And that's one that gets widely referenced in academic work. And another very good, perhaps slightly dated, because modern scholars are inclined to argue with some of the claims made, but another scholarly work, but also very good popular work, is Celtic Mythology by Prunchas McConnell. Could you post these books, says Donna. What do you mean post them? You mean put them in the post to you right now? Yes, of course. And I will start the bidding. Who will give me $20 for the or euros? Yeah, very good. You mean could I post them, a list of them, later on Facebook? Yeah, I could, if and when Facebook recovers from its current difficulties. And it turns out that MC Spill is Mary. You're very welcome, Mary. No problem. I downloaded the Kindle versions of your collected works. Do you have a suggested order to read them in, says Janelle. Ooh. That's a... No, I don't. If you've downloaded the monographs, 1 and 2, so 1 first, I would probably be inclined to start with Mythical Ireland before you tackle Island of the Setting Sun. I think Island of the Setting Sun is the largest, most comprehensive book, soon to be equaled by the new expanded edition of Mythical Ireland. But Ireland is harder going, shall we say. I think Mythical Ireland is easier to read. Ireland is more focused on the astronomy and the cosmology. But I would start with Mythical Ireland, I think. There you go. Nora Gaffney O'Connor agrees with you. Sorry, agrees with me about something, which is brilliant. What do you mean about something? She always agrees with me. Michael suggests that if Facebook is down due to the F word, that is the least of their problems. You got that right, Michael. Let me see if there's anything else. I think there were more questions that I might have missed. Yeah, McKillop is great, Mandy, because the sources are all listed at the end of each article, so you can go deeper. Don't ever... The one thing I wouldn't do is ever read a book about mythology or history or anything sort of where a scholarly approach is kind of needed that doesn't have sources, which means you might rule out Lady Gregory, and yet I still think Lady Gregory made a half decent attempt at some of the stuff, so I can't give out about her too much. There's a lot of the translations that we've read on various episodes of Live Irish Myths. So, for instance, Tugal Brunja da Durga, the destruction of da Durga's hostel. What was the other, like, for example, Arnya Fingan, Toynbo. I know there's Toynbo Cunha, but there was Toynbo what was the other one? There's lots of them, but we did one that was in 2 sections. Tonbow. Well, let me see. Tonbow Frech. It's quoted in the Bowen monograph. Tonbow Frech, etc., etc. There's loads of stories like that are translated or were translated in scholarly works, like, for instance, Revue Celtique, like that Zeitschrift for Keltische Philologie, which I think stands for the Journal of Celtic Philology. And lots of that stuff is actually available for download on the web. Now, as you know, I'm planning, or I have been talking about running a series, which would be an introduction to Irish myth and folklore. And that's all it would be. It wouldn't be a comprehensive overview. It would be an introduction. One of the things that I wanted to do was in one of those, shall we call them, what would you call them? Not lectures, not sections. In one of those modules, I would be talking about all the sources and which are the good ones, basically. So that's one maybe to look out for. You can't go wrong with vanhamel.nl, which is a source for the sources for a lot of these works, and will actually give you the links to the translations and the downloadables, etc., etc. Don't forget the Celt project at UCC is fabulous. They've translated a huge amount of material. There's a ton of stuff out there for free, downloadable. You don't have to have a significant investment in a library. Certain stuff is not available, obviously, because it's in copyright or whatever. Some of the early works, and I'm always mentioning this, those books there, those brown covered ones, and those sort of browny orangey covered ones, they're all modern facsimile reprints of older material, including the Annals of Ireland, the Annals of Ulster, Cogogale, Regaliev, etc. Where the original might be 100 or 150 years old, it cost you 100 or 200 quid to buy an original. You can get a facsimile reprint quite often for about a tenner, which is great. A lot of those are available on downloadable PDFs, but I'm just maybe a little bit traditional. I like having the printed form. Another one that I should probably throw into the recommended pile is The Story of the Irish Race by Seamus McManus, and we did an episode of Book Talk about that a little while ago, maybe in the past couple of months, sometime in the past couple of months. Can't say exactly when. So they would be a good introduction, I think. I think you'd get a lot of information from those. Anything else? Frech is spelt differently, Mandy, and actually McKillop would be one of the places to go for that, because he'll always give the variants of the spellings. F-R-A-E-C-H, F-R-A-I-C-H. Let me just see if there are any other alternatives. Yes, Frech, F-R-A-Fada, E-C-H. Also F-R-A-Fada, sorry, F-R-A-I-Fada-C-H, F-R-A-I-C-H, F-R-A-Fada-I-C-H, F-R-A-O-C-H, which I think you had, yes, is one of the variants, as luck would have it. And Frech, F-R-O-Fada-E-C-H. Old Irish Frech means heather. There you go. Name borne by dozens of personages in early Ireland, both legendary and historical. Hero of the 8th century Tonbow Frech, an antecedent to the action of the epic Tonbow Cuilga. So there you go. Not Joan, unfortunately. No, I sort of just haven't kept with it because just I've been very busy with one thing and another. I want to get back to it, and I definitely want to be able to converse in Irish. That's one of the big aims. It's like not to just be throwing a few words here and there, is to actually have conversations with people. If all goes according to plan, but sure, look, yeah, McConaughey's work is very accessible. So let's give you an example. This is the beginning of the section about the Tuatha Dé Danann. Always seems like a good topic to read about on a live stream. Always seems to be the most popular subject. The Celts have left no native myth of the world's creation. I disagree with Professor McConaughey, and if you've read the Bowen monograph, you'll know why. Though it would be strange if they lacked one. Caesar speaks of the Gaulish Druids' concern with the nature of the material universe as well as with the powers of the gods, and it may be that he had heard of such a cosmogony at second hand. If so, it is to Irish tradition that one would naturally look for the evidence, and unfortunately, though understandably, Irish tradition is here defective. For the monastic scholars who, in the late 6th and 7th century, set about compiling a record of the Irish people and its origins, were no mere amanuenses to the native tradition. Their guiding purpose was to accommodate this tradition within the framework provided by the Bible and early Christian historians like Eusebius and Orosius. To this end, they doctored it and grafted it on to the Christian account of man's origins. Adam became the ancestor of the Irish, as of the rest of mankind, though, as we have already seen, Dun was also not forgotten, and Dun being like an ancestor deity of the Irish, and also Dun of the Milesians, who was one of the arriving brothers who was actually drowned before they finally were able to overcome before they were able to overcome the Dé Dananns. Donna Furr is looking for an update on Richard Moore. How is he doing? Such a fascinating man. Well, you may or may not know there was a comprehensive update the other day, video update for patrons. And I was talking about the murals project here in Drogheda that I'm delighted that I've been sort of asked to consult on. And Richard is involved in that. And our mutual friend, the artist Kieran Dunleavy, who is at the moment in the middle of executing or shall we say, presenting the story of the Salmon of Knowledge. Richard is he's doing great. Still totally engrossed in the mythological history of Ireland, but in particular the area. Was the man who gave me really single-handedly gave me my real interest in the mythology of the Boyne Valley. When I was a young adult, I was aware of certain myths and legends. What I was not aware of at that time was the richness of mythology connected with the monuments and the landscape of this immediate area. And it turns out that those are the most important myths of ancient Ireland, are nearly all associated with this area. Of course, you have Moitura and others. You have Inverscania. You have other parts of the country that are associated with different aspects of mythology. But there's nothing comes close to this part of the world, the Boyne Valley, or this part of Ireland, certainly, in terms of our myths. And I always thank Richard for that. I was with Richard just the other day, actually. And it was great. Great to meet him. Would you ever do an episode about how the Irish saints landed in so many places? E.g., Suniva in Norway, Saint Lunaire in France, St. Ives in Cornwall. I would do. What's your first name? E. Humberducey. I know I should know this. Yes, I would, but it's not a subject about which I'm very knowledgeable, so I'd have to go and do research for it. And the difficulty at the moment is I don't have enough time for that because I just so many projects on the go. But yeah, Erica, sorry, yes, Erica. But I certainly would, and it's a subject I'm interested in as well. I'm also interested in doing more down the line about the early Christian church in Ireland and how it was sort of rebelled against, the Roman Church of the time and sort of did its own thing. I had a post about that on the Facebook page. I think was that yesterday, about how Ireland got the name the Island of Saints and Scholars. I'm interested in how Iona, which was part of that, would we call it a rebellious streak? You know, definitely interested in doing something on that. And I know that when I was reading the wonderful, it's very scholarly, but it is very good. One that spoke quite a lot about, the Irish monks traveling to the continent and bringing back knowledge with them, was the book that I was reading. Now, I haven't finished it, but I was reading it a while back, which was the book about the Annals of the Four Masters, which I thought was on the shelf in front of me. And I can't see it at this moment in time. Did I move it? Oh, I did. And that's by Bernadette Cunningham, The Annals of the Four Masters, Irish History, Kingship and Society in the early 17th century. Now, I know it's talking about the 17th century because that's when the Annals of the Four Masters were compiled. But I was very interested in the sort of backing and forthing that went on between Ireland and the continent, places like Bobbio, etc. And it really was a case that the monks of the Irish monasteries were very well travelled in Europe, and not just very well travelled, but very knowledgeable too. They brought a lot of knowledge back with them. Knowledge of the Bible and Christianity, of course, but also knowledge of literature and works such as Homer, Iliad, etc., etc. A good excuse to come to Mull, says Mandy. Let me mull that over. Sorry, that's terrible. Yes, that's on my to-do list. Absolutely, it is. Just having a look here through the. If I don't want to miss any questions. I don't think I have missed any. Marcus asks if I believe that because the Romans never fully established in Ireland, was that the reason behind the Irish flourishing in knowledge? It certainly was one of the reasons. I mean, for several centuries, at least until, we had this discussion recently, didn't we? At least until the 7th century, this Synod of Whitby, which I think was in the year 668? I know we had this before. This is like deja vu. Synod of Whitby was, I think, 668 AD, when an attempt was made to bring the Irish back into line. There were very specific calculations made around Easter, which is, of course, tied with lunar movements and required a sort of significant knowledge of astronomy. According to the article that I shared yesterday, which is a slightly older Irish Times article, the Irish monks were among the earliest to perfect that knowledge. But in fact, my own belief would be that knowledge had pre-existed the arrival of Christianity. And if you look at the carvings on some of the stones at Brunabonia, there's a suggestion, at least, that can't be ruled out there, that significant lunar calculations were being made. Were being made in the Neolithic. It's not that the Romans never got fully established, Marcus. It's that they didn't establish at all. It seems that they watched Ireland from afar. The furthest reaches of the empire, the defeat of the Druids in Wales, Hadrian's Wall, and all of that. I think, to be honest, at the point where is this a good comparison to make? I'm not a historian, so this might end up getting me in trouble, but it's a bit like Nazi Germany, where in the Second World War, uh, Nazi Germany started invading. Sorry, the German Nazis. I apologize. Started invading countries, and they seem to be expanding very rapidly. I mean, they crossed France in record time, helped indeed by some. What's the name of that drug that the German soldiers were taking, which gave them this huge energy and meant that they didn't need much sleep. And the French were sort of overwhelmed by that. Anyway, the whole thing expanded and expanded and expanded. And I think it's just naturally a case that a thing gets so big and then it runs out of steam. There were Roman coins deposited at Newgrange. They were spoken about on the Newgrange and Nouth Facebook page in the past week. Excuse me, somebody associated with Brunabogna had travelled to Italy, to the place where at least one of those coins had been minted, which suggests to us that somebody who was using Roman coinage in the early centuries AD visited Newgrange and left what we might call votive offerings. The Pervitin, thank you. That was the one, and that's from Marcus as well. Pervitin, which was crystal meth. They took that and they were just able to sort of they were able to function almost as a machine, but again, my knowledge here is limited. What I understand is that by the time St. Patrick was alleged to have brought Christianity in 432 AD, and I say alleged because, look, there's been lots of discussions about Cormac MacArt was supposed to have converted to Christianity, and he lived in the 3rd century AD. There's been lots of discussions about precursors to Patrick, Patrick just claiming the title in mythological terms. But by the 5th century, the Roman Empire was in decline. Ireland was way, way, way off the edge of the whole thing, out in the sea, beyond, you had to cross the sea to get to Britain, and then you had to cross the sea again to get to Ireland. And I think the Synod of Whitby in the 7th century was the first serious effort to put some manners on those bloody intransigent Irish who always seem to want to do their own thing. Funnily enough, that's still an aspect of that's definitely still an aspect of the Irish psyche. History with Kaylee is in the house. Kaylee During is with us. Hello, Kaylee. You're very welcome along. We have no Facebook tonight because Facebook is down all over the world. So we're having a bit of a chat. Somebody's asking, what is the difference between between a saint and a scholar? And you might say that's a facile question, but it isn't. It's actually a very good question because, a saint being a religious person in the early Irish church, there seem to have been a lot of saints. For evidence of that, all you need to do is look at the absolute abundance of saints' names in parishes around Ireland. And if you just take one county, like my own county, County Louth, you will find that there's a St. Denis in Clogherhead. There was St. Bridget, who was associated with Dunleer, believe it or not. This is, possibly the same Bridget of Fahart or a different one. You've got St. Borchel in... is it Drumcar? You've got, basically what I'm saying is every time you move by even 5 miles, you find there's a saint in that area. Saints, who determines who becomes a saint? I would say that sainthoods back then were like the religious equivalent of being the local chief or high king, that at various stages, while mention is often made of, the Irish high king, as if there was only one king ruling the entire island. That was never really the case. It is often said that Brian Boru was the first true High King of Ireland, but was there ever a High King who ruled over all of the other sort of under kings, there's very little difference in some ways between a saint and a scholar, because it was the holy men in many cases who were the scholars, or who facilitated, who mentored the scholars in the early schools of learning. Now, in the sort of period of time between the arrival of St. Patrick and, say, the Vikings, or say the period of time from the arrival of St. Patrick until around 1000 AD, till the era of Brian Boru, religious and secular learning were sort of intermeshed, as it were, in these monasteries. It was only sort of after the Viking era, after the Boru era, in fact, probably in the 12th century, with the arrival of the first of the great orders, the Cistercians, and with the synods of that century, the synods of Kells, the synod of Rathbrassel and the synod of Kells Mellifont, which gave the church in Ireland a diocesan veneer, a diocesan structure, not a veneer. It wasn't just a gloss, it was a structure. That it was really then that the secular element got sort of detached, because one of the things that was lamented by the Cayley Day, or the Culdees, who were sort of like a strict branch of religious thought, was that monasteries were owned as if they were prizes for kings, and that there was no detachment between politics and religion, or not enough detachment. This is something that is the feature of one of the new chapters in the new expanded edition of Mythical Ireland, New Light on the Ancient Past, which, as I say, hopefully will be published next month. That there wasn't enough detachment, that kings and scribes and monks were all part of one sort of happy clan that shouldn't have been quite so comfortable together, as it were. So, for instance, Cormac MacCullanan, who was a 10th century Cormac, who we know from Sana's Cormac's Glossary, wasn't just a bishop at Cashel, he was also a king. And you just kind of just wonder, how little detachment there must have been. How do we determine in that era of time who is the saint and who's the scholar? And is there such a sort of strict demarcation between them? There probably wasn't, to be honest. You'll probably find that there were saints who preserved, saints in inverted commas. I know that there'll be some practicing Catholics watching who'll say a lot of these people were never officially saints of the church. That there were probably saints who recorded what you might call pagan or secular lore. In fact, that was almost certainly the case. But good question nonetheless. I hope I have gone some way to answering it. Facebook, back in California, says Michael Pike, not back in Ireland. Michael, enjoy your updates. Is the Cailleach not thought to be responsible for the seasons, asks Nora. The preeminent authority on the Cailleach is Gearro Jo Cruilich, who wrote the Book of the Cailleach. There is a lot of lore attached to the Cailleach, which would suggest that she has some amount of control over, in particular, winter weather, the coming and the going of winter. A lot of that is what we would call folklore. In other words, that was oral when it was recorded. And of course, a huge amount of that was recorded in the early 20th century by the Irish Folklore Commission through their own collectors and through the Schools Project. And a lot less about the Cailleach is found in the manuscripts. In other words, the Cailleach doesn't seem to have gotten a huge amount of publicity, to use a phrase, to use a word, from the scribes, but in the vernacular lore, she was quite present. But yeah, there is an aspect of her. There's also the transformative aspect of the Cailleach, which may relate to that. And of course, the Banshee is undoubtedly connected with the Cailleach. The lore of the Banshee and the lore of the Cailleach are similar in some respects, and so you could see the two of them as being variants of each other. What was I going to say? That there's an aspect of the Cailleach that she is a haggard, ugly, extremely unattractive old woman with wiry white hair and a bent frame and a skeletal look and teeth that look are green and they look like tree trunks and warts on her face and a mustache and all of that. But there's also an aspect of her story which we encounter with Niall of the Nine Hostages, for instance, in his story, the story of how he embraced her, that when she is embraced, there's an aspect of that which is undoubtedly what Joseph Campbell would say, sort of conquering your fear or the hero journey. But there's an aspect of transformation, so which suggests to me, and maybe I'm talking through my hat, but it would suggest to me that you embrace the winter as a necessary evil, a necessary aspect of living in Ireland. It's that Ireland is a very good country for producing crops and growing grass and feeding cattle. So as soon as agriculture arrived here, the people who brought it, the people of the Neolithic, realized, hey, this place is very good for growing crops and grass. And nowhere was that more obvious than in the Boyne Valley. And I think that's one of the main reasons that the passage tombs, or the She, are the largest in the Boyne Valley. It's because the land was abundant, and that is where the land was most productive. I'm trying to tie this back to. I'm trying to remember how I got from the Cailleach to talking about agriculture. Yes, but at an early point, sometime around 6,000 years ago, sometime after the arrival of the first cattle and the first growing of crops in Ireland, the people who were doing that realized, oh God, we have to put up with this thing called Irish winter. Now, it's certainly no worse. If not, it's a lot better than living in, for instance, in Latvia. Just to take one country, for instance, where in the winter the temperature can plummet into the minus 30 Celsius, where the Baltic Sea can freeze over, so that you can walk all the way from Latvia to Finland, for instance. It's not that harsh, but for instance, right now it's absolutely spilling with rain down here. It's not winter yet. It's the end of the harvest here. Gero 4 is the Irish for October. That's not for you, Nora. You'll know this, but for some of the other viewers, Gero 4 is the end of the harvest. That's the name for October in Irish, and really winter begins at the end of this month when we have Icha Hauna, or the night before Samhain, and Samhain in astronomical terms early in November. And so you kind of have to embrace it, don't you, in order to see what happens when the Cailleach is embraced, is that she turns from this haggard, ugly, withered old woman into a beautiful, voluptuous young lady, representing fecundity, fertility, sovereignty, etc., etc. And the same is true, I think, in agricultural terms and in climatological terms or meteorological terms, that when you live in Ireland, it's one of the things that you have to accept, is that you have this state of the year, which is very Cailleach-like. And if you embrace her and you can sort of partner her through the winter, you'll be rewarded when she transforms, like the landscape transforms. The landscape is dead throughout the winter. You can't grow crops. There's no grass growth once the temperature is less than 6 degrees Celsius, the ground temperature, that is. When the ground temperature in Ireland is less than 6 degrees Celsius, the grass does not grow. Why that's important is because you need to plan as a farmer. If you're keeping cattle and they're grazing on grass, you need to plan very carefully when you finish grazing in the winter. When you house them, this is modern farming I'm talking about, and when you reintroduce them to pasture in terms of making the most of it. It's very, very important. And that's all part of it. Wow, what a rabbit hole. Thank you for the question, Nora. Aspect of youthful in summer, hag in winter. Yes, that's a very good way of putting it, Nora. Absolutely, yeah. 100%. Facebook hasn't returned in Rio de Janeiro, says Daisy. We have 58 viewers on YouTube, which isn't bad, you know. Some of the Facebookers are undoubtedly here. Irish Sphinx asked a question, which I don't think I'm going to be able to answer comprehensively, but it's interesting nonetheless. What's come with most saints is visions, so ties into Druid pasts and taught from what was bestowed on them. Absolutely. Look, one of the reasons that Christianity was able to flourish, and I've said this before, and this is something that you will read in all of the scholarly works, one of the main, in fact, the main reason that Christianity flourished in Ireland after St. Patrick's alleged arrival in the 5th century was because it didn't attempt to eradicate and completely subdue and subjugate what was there before. It brought it along, as it were. It said, right, and I say it, I'm talking about the religion, Christian religion, which is referred to in those centuries immediately after St. Patrick. The very early incubating version of Christianity in this country is called Celtic or Irish Christianity. And I think that's because it was one of the reasons that you don't see, for instance, martyrs, which is why Patrick wasn't killed for bringing Christianity to Ireland, is because the missionaries of that time encountered a very, very deeply rooted folk religion here at the time, which I maintain still at that time worshipped the pantheistic or the pantheon of deities who were the Tuatha Dé Danann. And that in fact the very idea that we were speaking of a little while ago of there being saints in every pocket of Ireland is related to the fact that there were chiefs in every pocket of Ireland. It's just like the religion just sort of copied the geopolitical situation of the time. Of course, some of this is entirely speculative on my part, and I couldn't give you the sort of factual evidence to substantiate it. But if you think about how long the Christian monks sort of coalesced, as it were, with the Druids, if you want to call them that, with the bards, with the kings, then it absolutely makes sense that there were bards who ended up and Druids who ended up becoming monks and possibly saints, and that there were monks and scribes who never really subscribed completely to the Christianity that they were supposed to be espousing. Now, that was challenging, no doubt, for some of them who probably teetered between, well, is it one or the other? Knowing that, with their biblical knowledge, of course, knowing that, first commandment, for instance, thou shalt have no other gods before me, and the punishments of the jealous God of the Old Testament, as we saw in our discussion of Answer to Job. So that may have presented one with sort of moral dilemmas, as it were, But it certainly seems that that was the case for centuries, again, until really you encounter, obviously, the Culdees, who decided, we're not having any of this shit. We're completely extricating ourselves from all this pagan nonsense, and devoting ourselves entirely to Christianity. But what I'm saying is that a lot of the early monasteries did not do that. That uh, bard and druid and monk, all learned people, uh, mostly men, it has to be said, all learned folk, uh, must have, I think, to a degree, have had a mutual respect of each other. And that didn't really start to dissipate until the arrival of the big monasteries. And as I said, after the synods of the 12th century, when the structure of the church became much more rigid, and much more centralized, that, you had Armagh as, a seat of power. Uh, you had fewer seats of power. You had larger seats of power covering larger areas, and having dominion. Whereas previously, and again, the same thing with the very early church, where the control just wasn't there, from Rome. It was pretty much non existent until 668, whenever Whitby was. That, there was none of that rigid control that you associate with the much later church. And so I can see a scenario in which, in the monasteries, the Druids, with their knowledge, and the bards, with their lore, were uh, perhaps not necessarily on equal in rank, but certainly on equal terms with the scribes. And as I say, there must have been, I imagine, a certain amount of mutual respect there. It's like, you're a man of learning, I'm a man of learning. We admire each other. Let's not kill each other, because you're not here to tell me that the Tuatha Danann aren't real, and I'm not here to tell you that, Christianity is not allowed in Ireland because the Tuatha Danann will kill you, or anything like that, because that wouldn't be the scenario. And then you get stories like Altran Chia Ga Vatar about Newgrange, where the first half of the story is seems to be an entirely indigenous or pre-Christian narrative, involving the Tuatha Danann, and the second half seems to be all about the conversion of one of the Tuatha Danann to Christianity, and Patrick being involved. Did the Druids know Latin? Not sure. Some of the manuscripts, the earliest manuscripts, are in Latin. The monks definitely knew Latin. How many of the monks had a sort of Druidic background? I don't know. I don't know. I'm not sure what this question is, Tara. I wonder who buried Newgrange Nouth Douth Extra. Maybe you could clarify what your question is exactly. Did you watch How the Celts Saved Britain documentary on YouTube? Also love the topic choice. I didn't, and I'm interested to find out how much it has in common with the book by Thomas Cahill, which we discussed on one of the early book talk episodes, which is called How the Irish Saved Civilization, which is precisely about how all of this sacred knowledge was nurtured in the Irish monasteries, and when the plague came and the Dark Ages and all the rest in Europe, that this knowledge was preserved in Ireland and then migrated outwards again. I wonder, are there some similarities to the documentary? Tara Tevlin, if you wouldn't mind clarifying your question further, I'd love to have a chat with you about it. If it's about Newgrange Nouth and Douth, that is my comfort zone, as it were. When mythology got political, social change. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Of course, a great deal of the politics, and this is something you must always be aware of, and it's only something I've sort of really become cognizant of in the past 5 or 6 years, is that when you're reading myths, you have to understand that when they were written down, and where they were written down, and who they were written down by, are very important. Because of this, we saw with last week, we were talking about, um, so say the Ainail, the kings, the northern Ainail and the southern Ainail, um, that they were very, very powerful dynasty. Um, And they would have, of course, had influence upon, for instance, the creation of the genealogies and the linking of their families back through the mythology to, for instance, the Milesians, which showed a pedigree. And if you could say, my ancestor was Eramon who reigned at Tara, then you had a greater sense of legitimacy, in the role as a sovereign, when you could say, well, our experts, our Shanachie, our Druids, our Fili, our Brehons, our Olives, they have compiled our story. And of course, the story was a concoction to a degree. Some of it was true, but some of it was entirely concocted, which made the Inale look like they had been around forever, basically. And you're looking also at, for instance, in Táinbó Cúilge, you're looking very much at a Connacht versus Ulster narrative. You're always looking for how Cashel and the south of the country features. Uh, 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 is it Cogul Gael Regalia, the one I mentioned earlier, the battle of the Gaels with the Gauls or the foreigners, was a panegyric to Brian Boru and this tiny little tribe from the southwestern corner, well, not entirely southwestern, but this entire tiny tribe from a tiny part of Ireland called the Dáil Cosh or the Dalcassians, um, from which Brian Boru emerged to become the High King or the Over King of Ireland. Is really quite extraordinary. So there's a political element there all the time that I'm still learning about every day. And this is why I was told 10 years ago and I was told 15 years ago, at a time when I was trying to absolutely catch up with all of the mythology of Brunabonia, the mythology of Moichura, anything to do with the Daedanans, anything to do with the Milesians and the Book of Invasions, the Dunshanicus, etc. I was being told by learned friends and friendly people on the internet, Anthony, it's very important that you study the monasteries and medieval Ireland. You need the context in which a lot of this stuff was written down, because without that, you're never going to know you're never going to be able to disentangle. And one of the great challenges is to disentangle what we might call indigenous or pre-Christian tradition, and that aspect that's of the written down stories. I'm talking here about the written down ones principally, and those aspects that are clearly sort of influenced by Christian scribes. So in some cases, it's really obvious. The Dunshanicus, metrical Dunshanicus story of Douth, for instance, which says that the King of Ireland brought all the men here to build him a tower alike to the Tower of Nimrod, which would reach its top to heaven. And immediately you're into the realm of, well, clearly these monks were trying to compare the building of this monument to the building of the Tower of Babylon, right? And that ties it in with Genesis and gives us a feeling that, it perhaps undermines our confidence, or our, not confidence, that's a bad word. It undermines our stance, my stance personally, that the story of Douth is pre-Christian. And pertains to eclipses and pertains to astronomical study and ties in very closely with the structure and the alignments of the monument, as I detail in Island of the Setting Sun. And disentangling those, saying, is the introduction of the Tower of Nimrod, and for instance, in other stories that talk about the Day of Judgment, and the talk about revenge for John the Baptist and all that, does that completely sort of contaminate the story? Does that mean then that you have to throw out the baby with the bathwater, as some scholars believe? There is one historian, at least, that I know about that says metrical Dunshanicus of Douth is all based on the Old Testament. And I completely disagree with that. Just because there's a reference to the Tower of Nimrod does not mean you throw the baby out with the bathwater. I hope I haven't gone on too long. But Mandy, you're absolutely right. Do you know what I liked about that book that I just started dipping into? I bought this recently and I've been dipping into it. It's Eastern religions. And the first section is about Hinduism. And what I was really interested in about Hinduism, and I hope this doesn't, I hope this makes some sense, was that in Hinduism, there is actually no chief deity. There's no chief god as such. You can have one. And it seems that in certain regions, there might have been one. But in the overall sphere, it's not like there's this Yahweh or Jehovah, figure that is the absolute father of everything, the father of creation, the father of, the Christ, the Messiah, and all the rest. And what I liked about it was this. It seems, and maybe I'm wrong, and maybe those of you who are much more learned in these things will correct me and chastise me accordingly. One of the things I really liked about Hinduism, and it really appealed to me, was that it seemed that you could almost choose your deity, I think that's one of the things that endears people to the Dedanans. I meet a lot of people. Now, some of them are what you would call modern pagans, or, they have a practice based around their beliefs. Some of them are devoted to particular deities. Like there are people in Ireland devoted to Crum, which is a very dark deity. I wouldn't be devoted to Crum if he was the last deity, to be honest. There are some people who are devoted to Morrigan. There are some people devoted to Dagda. That it seems that you can sort of choose your own deity, your own chief deity. I actually really like that idea. And that ties in with the whole Jungian belief that these were archetypes. And so what you're doing is identifying with an archetype that resonates very strongly with you. How did we get on to even talk about it? Vicky Southall is in the house, and I hope if Evan is there and Chile, we're saying hello. Everybody say hello to Vicky and Evan and Chile. Hello and good evening from Ireland. Good afternoon to you guys. Let me see if there are any other sort of questions around that. Nora agrees. Yes. Don't agree with. Feel free to argue, please. Don't necessarily just agree. I know, Nora, you're very good, and Jesus, if you weren't, I tell you what, if you weren't out for a dip in the sea today, all you'd need to do is step out into the garden right now, and you'd feel like you were in the sea. The Globalization of God by Dara Molloy. Great book on pre-Christian and Celtic Christianity. I don't have it, Marie. Is it Moira? That's one I must look up. The Globalization of God. Sounds interesting. One person whose work I have read and seems to be very good in relation to religion and God is Karen Armstrong. I'm not sure if you're familiar with her work. One in particular that I haven't read but looks really promising is I can't find it now. Yeah, typical. Oh yes, there you go. It is called A History of God. Karen Armstrong. Brilliantly lucid, splendidly readable, dazzling, says the Sunday Times. The idea of a single divine being, God, Yahweh, Allah, has existed for over 4,000 years, but the history of God is also the history of the human struggle. Yeah, that one looks really promising. Just haven't had the time to dip into it. It's been there for a couple of years. I wouldn't mind. Oh, Vicky's birthday. Wow. We're going to the beach on Wednesday for my birthday. Well, happy birthday to you. And everybody sing along. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Vicky. Happy birthday to you. Boo! For she's a jolly good fellow. And this is where you have to dance. Happy birthday. Karen Armstrong is brilliant, says Mandy McCurl. I have several of her books. I just can't immediately put them to hand or put my hand on them. I have several of her books. And this is where, the task becomes much greater again in terms of when you decide, like I did 22 years ago, sparked by Richard Moore principally, when you decide to immerse yourself in Irish mythology, you've got so many things to do. You've got to learn the stories. Well, not learn them, but at least become familiar with them. Then you've got to learn the structures and the history. Then you've got to learn a little bit about medieval Ireland and who wrote the myths down and the folklore, the stuff that didn't get written down that survived into the 20th century. And there's all that, right? Then there's the comparative. It's like, how far do you go with the comparative stuff? Do you then read Greek and Roman classical mythology? Do you read Grimm's fairy tales? Do you read Norse mythology? Do you read and the answer is yes, but I just don't have enough time for it. It's just I would love to be able to have the time and the energy, of course. The time and the energy to read all this stuff. And then you take it a step further, which is what I'm doing recently, which is learning more about religions, which is why I believe Joseph Campbell was so brilliant because his comparative work was second to none. He was able to give uh, an example from Native American Indian tradition and compare that with Polynesian tradition and compare that with Norse tradition and compare it with an African tribe's beliefs and compare that with something from Hinduism or something from Buddhism or Taoism or whatever. And that to me is like absolutely mind blowing. It's like to be that knowledgeable would be brilliant. And I'm sorry to say that I'm not. But every day is a learning day. And I think when you're learning and your mind is expanding, you always feel like I think there's huge reward in that. Personally, I do anyway. Which is why as I say, I wish I had more time and energy for it all, that I could just completely immerse myself. And it may surprise some of you, and it won't surprise some of you, but you all know my feelings about Christianity. I was raised as a Christian. I haven't completely abandoned Christianity. Um, it gives me a frame of reference. Let's just put it that way. And it is interesting to study the Bible, but to study it against that backdrop of, mythology and spiritual belief, which you see in your own vernacular or earlier tradition, that which was written down by Christian monks, but which ironically was pre-Christian, you know. And it's helpful not to block any of it out or to put it away as if it's irrelevant. It's all relevant in some way. In fact, the medieval scholars would say that one of the reasons it's very important that you kind of keep all this within your purview is because you can then see where a story is based either on a secular myth from somewhere else in the world, like something might be based on the Iliad, or on Hellenistic myth, or where it's based on something from the Bible, some story or some aspect of the Bible. And it's important to have that. Read alouds, yes. Well, I suppose that's what Live Irish Myths is, and the book talk. They are quite often, you know, read alouds. Um, yeah, um, something that people seem to enjoy. Something that I've been told I must do is to create audiobooks of my works, and absolutely would love to. But it's time. It's time. It's finding time to do it. Dip all year round. It's my thing for years now. I'm just a mad joke, says Nora. Well, fair play to you. Although in the winter time, I'd venture to say that some days you'll be getting into the sea and it'll be warmer in the sea than it will be outside. Omar says Empire of the False Christ. Not sure what that means, but anyway, thank you for your comment. A lot of people saying happy birthday to Vicky. And to be honest, we have been going for an hour and a half more. I think slightly more. I think it started at 20 to 8, and it's now nearly 9:15. So if there are no more questions, we might wrap it up. I am going to reschedule. I mean, providing the Facebook is still offline. This is unprecedented. When was the last time Facebook was offline worldwide for, you know, for uh, 3 or 4 hours? Maybe it's not 3, or maybe I'm exaggerating. But if Facebook comes back, I might schedule the first of the Tuan McCarroll episodes for tomorrow. So research it, research it, research. Thank you, Omar. Not really sure what I'm supposed to be researching, but that is one of the things I've been doing for 22 years is researching. And I don't mean watching YouTube videos. I mean doing genuine research. Facebook and Instagram off nearly all day in the US, says Susan. Wow. So it is. It's a fairly serious one then in this case. Omar, are you on the crater? Are you having a drop of the crater? Are you? Are you? Have you been dipping into the whiskey? At least you're honest. Gary wants to know if it would be such a bad thing if Facebook never came back. You could argue that, yeah. Yeah. It has its positives and it has its negatives, like everything. From a Mythical Ireland point of view, Facebook is actually quite important to me. A lot of people get their information from Mythical Ireland through Facebook. So thank you, Maria. Glad you enjoyed the live stream. Not a typical episode by any means, but I enjoyed going down the various rabbit holes that we've been down this evening. Manacon found a lot of similarities between the Eastern and ourselves, even in the words. That doesn't surprise me, because it has often been said by the linguists, by the philologists, that like the language of India and the language of the Irish language are two languages that are a branch of Indo-European. They're on the very periphery of that, and there's an awful lot in common between them. It's fascinating, really interesting study. Whiskey, yeah. Well, enjoy it. I mean, don't overindulge. Stay safe. Put the whiskey down and drink some water. Yeah. The lesson to learn is not to rely on social media companies. Yeah, Mythical Ireland is reasonably well diversified in that there's the website, there's good presence on Facebook, but there's also Instagram, and there's also Twitter, and there's also YouTube. However, I would say that there's nothing that does everything as well as Facebook does. Facebook is good for posts and links and photographs and videos and live streams. None of the other platforms are good for all of those. So there you go. There's Facebook's advantages. Anyway, we're not. Oh, Julianne Osborne is in the house. I didn't even know you were there. Much love to all the two. Hi, Julie. Hope you're keeping well. Long time no see. Hope we get a chance to see you before too long on the green sod again. We should make a Mythical Ireland ham radio frequency just in case. I did say to a friend of mine 10 minutes before I came on air, a friend of mine was texting me about the Facebook thing, saying she didn't have any internet either. And she was wondering, was it the beginning of World War III? I said, no. I said, in any case, if all that happens, I still have my ham radio. So there you go. Brendan Byrne, it was nice to see you, Brendan. I'm not sure if I said hello to you earlier on, but good to see you here. And thanks. I hope you enjoyed yourself. Facebook off in London too, says Lynn Murphy. Yeah, it's all like it's quite serious. But anyway, thankfully, we've enjoyed ourselves. So many of you are. They're still there, 57. That's not too bad. And when Facebook comes back, I'll just share this link to the Facebookers in case they missed it. And I think I'll probably aim to do, unless I'm tired, Tuesday's a busy day at work, and sometimes I work late, but I'll try to do the first of the Tuan McCarroll episodes tomorrow to make up for the fact that it wasn't on tonight. Melissa is in Killarney. Hello, Melissa. I hope it's not raining too heavily down there. Janet Moran, I found Mythical Ireland and the Tuat through Facebook. You see, this is the thing. You can't, Omar says, much love, brother. Keep up the good work. Well, thank you, Omar. And yeah, I might have a wee drop of the Crathor myself before the night's out. Anyway, thanks a million. And to Adele Perth, Adele, I'm sorry that I know a little while ago you were trying to communicate with me and I missed that. Apologies. I should say that a lot of people try to contact me, and it's just sometimes I miss stuff, especially Facebook messaging in particular, not so much emails, which is why I always encourage people to send me an email. A huge amount of people, friends and non-friends, contact me through Facebook, and inevitably I miss stuff. So apologies about that. Anyway, it's good to see you, and I hope life is treating you well in Australia and that you're having a good day. Of course, things are on the up there. We're going down in terms of the length of days contracting rapidly, and winter's coming in. For you, it's springtime. You can look forward to the summer. Joan has a message for Melissa. If you see Joan's husband in Killarney, tell him to go easy on the beer. Does that mean he can hit the Crathor? Never mind. Anyway, thanks a million for tuning in. It's been a great pleasure. It's been a lovely chat, actually. And don't forget that I do intend to reintroduce the conversation series in the wintertime. And I have a few guests lined up for that. Alan Hubner, hello, Alan. Thank you indeed. And Irish Sphinx 1. You're all very welcome. Yeah, I do intend to reintroduce the conversation series. As always, just a quick mention that if you want to support Mythical Ireland, the Patreon address is there, patreon.com/Mythical Ireland. Thanks to the patrons for helping me to choose what will be the cover of the revised Mythical Ireland. Thank you for all your help with that. There were 3 options, narrowed down from a field of about 14 or 15. And the patrons chose a clear winner from those 3. I'm delighted to say that is going to be the cover of Mythical Ireland. I'll probably reveal that tomorrow if the social media comes back. If not, I may hold off. And pre-ordering will be open from tomorrow. Also, don't forget, 2022 calendar will be printed in a couple of weeks' time. If you want one, get on the website. That's mythicalireland.com. Don't forget to order your calendar and get in early, because all of those who pre-ordered last year had their calendars sent out on the first week of November at Samhain and had them in loads of time for Christmas, whereas those who ordered them in the middle of December maybe didn't get them for Christmas. So something to remember. In the meantime, thank you for watching. Thank you for tuning in. It has been an enormous pleasure, as it always is, to share this time with you from the Mythical Ireland Library to all of the viewers around the world. I'm Anthony Murphy here in Drogheda, in the Boyne Valley, close to the great complex of Brúnaboine, saying Ikawa, good night, Kolusov, sound sleep, but don't go to sleep if you're in Australia and it's only the morning time, or if you're in the United States and you have an afternoon's work to do. Agus Slán go fóill, which means bye for now. Most importantly, Tóg go bogé. Take it easy.